And now, I welcome Mr. Roy Friedman, Chief Executive Director of the Identity and Biometric Applications Unit. Roy will tell you about Israel's approach to digital identity and how our everyday work relates to it. Mr. Roy Friedman.
Boker Tov, good morning. This is great. It's my pleasure to host the third Biometrics and Identity Conference and exhibition, BIST 2018, for the first time as part of CYBERWEEK, proving to be a great platform for our event. This conference is a unique opportunity for government, private sector, and academia to meet, engage, discover new technologies and fresh ideas. I encourage all of you to talk to each other, change ideas, and create new partnerships. I also invite you to walk around the exhibition downstairs during the break, meet the entrepreneurs and their new technologies. I'd like to thank Yigal, General Manager of the Cyber Directorate, and Rafi Franco, Head of Cyber Robustness, for being part of this event and for making this conference possible. I'd like to thank all our speakers from Israel and abroad. As you heard, we have some 17 speakers today. We have a delegation for the first time in Israel from the OBIM, Office of Biometric Identity Management at the DHS, from Frontex at the EU, from NEC in the US, and from Dig Identity in the Netherlands. Thank you all for making the trip here. Thank you for coming and sharing your insights with us. Last but not least, I would like to thank Yasmin for putting this together with the help of Inbar and Sofit. Without your help, this event wouldn't have taken place. So I'll start by talking about Israel's national approach to digital identity and biometric identity. And start by asking, what's the big fuss that governments have with identity, digital identity? Why is it so important? Well, first, because digital identity is the entrance point to the digital economy. Without that, governments cannot deliver secure government services to our citizens and cannot enable the digital economy. Second is that digital identity is the front door to cyberspace. In order to enter cyberspace, to a secure cyberspace, one must have an identity. And that's a big reason governments deal with it. And we see that the data supports that. Over 80% of hacking-related breaches leverage a weak or a stolen password. Remember that. Top action variety in breaches is the use of a stolen credential in order to do hacking. So we mentioned passwords. I've been hearing for the last 5 years or so that the password should die, that we should kill the password. And, well, it's still alive and kicking. So we see that a quarter of the people use one of these top 25 passwords. And these are, for those of you who can't see, really easy passwords, like 123456, I love you, let me in, and the like. So imagine a hacker trying to hack into a system, just trying one of these 25 passwords, one after the other, and eventually get access to that account. Also, we know that a lot of people reuse their passwords across different systems, across different websites. With a show of hands, how many of us actually do that, reuse passwords? I know I do, don't be shy. Well, statistics, research shows that 60% of the people do that. And I think that 40% didn't understand the question. So, and just as an anecdote, Mark Zuckerberg's password to his Instagram account was hacked about 2 years ago. And guess what that password was? It was dad, dad, dad. Now, his daughter was just born around that time. So if savvy Mark Zuckerberg can choose such an easy password, who are we to choose otherwise? Experts around the world say that identity fraud is at epidemic levels. And we have research showing that in the UK, in the past 10 years, identity fraud has almost doubled. We know that in the United States, where identity fraud is a major problem, 7% of Americans each year are victims of identity fraud. And that the average loss per fraud is over $1,000. Imagine the damage to the economy because of that. It's huge. Here in Israel, we know that there is a correlation between people who issue multiple ID cards due to loss or theft, who issue a few of them, and the fact that they have a criminal record. That teaches us that identity is crucial in crime and in cybercrime. So I'll talk a little about the Israeli approach to identity. What seems to Israelis pretty natural is not the same all over the world. First, here in Israel, we have a population register. It's a very thorough register, a cradle to grave, that has all the details of Israelis, citizens and residents. Then we all have ID numbers. These are unique numbers that we get a few hours after we're born. We get them at the hospital, and we stay with the same number throughout our entire lifetime. And we have a mandatory ID card, and more recently, an e-ID card with biometrics and digital certificates. Israel has a biometric database, for those of you who have not heard. The database is used to support the issuance process, and for that purpose only. A couple of years ago, government charged my unit with developing a national policy for digital and secure identification. We wrote that policy, and it was accepted by government last summer. The policy actually lays the foundation for secure digital identification in Israel, and we've also established several sets of guidelines. And these include defining for the first time in Israel the concept of levels of assurance. And for those of you not familiar with it, basically it's saying we'll match the sensitivity of the service with the strength of the identity, so that the identity is strong enough for that specific service. And 3 months ago, we issued a guidance for the entire government to give out government digital services at a minimum of LOA 3. And LOA 3 is, level of assurance 3 is a two-factor enrollment and a two-factor authentication. And we believe that raises the bar much higher and secures our digital cyberspace. We cannot talk about digital identity here in Israel without mentioning our eID and ePassport project managed by the Ministry of the Interior. The goal of the project is to have stronger and more reliable identity documents. And as I said before, they include biometrics, 2 fingerprints and a facial image, and digital certificates. And to support the issuance process, there's a biometric database, and to make sure that one citizen, one resident have only one identity. And because of the sensitivities of the project in general, and all the biometrics in it, which are of course sensitive, Parliament created my role as Biometric Applications Commissioner to perform oversight over the entire project end to end. So let's talk a little about biometrics. Why are they so sensitive? First, I would say that it's because it's what we are. And as human beings, we are very wary about things that are close to us. So that's more of a psychological issue. Second is that biometric, unlike a password or a digital credential, cannot be changed, cannot be revoked, and stays the same throughout our entire life with minor changes. We cannot change our face, or at least it's very difficult and very costly. So, nevertheless, we see more and more biometrics being used around the world. And we know that some 40%, over 40% of the people use biometrics to unlock their mobile phones, their computer devices, and that's quite a lot. Imagine what that figure was like about 5 years ago. I know that I didn't unlock my mobile phone with my fingerprint 5 years ago. I would argue that it would be 1/10 of that. And then people were asked, how comfortable do you feel with using biometrics? And across the board, we can see that some 75% of the people felt some degree of comfort using biometrics. And what stands out is that over 85% of the people felt comfortable using their fingerprints. I see that with the last data, that people are just getting more and more used to using their fingerprints in order to gain access to their mobile devices. So that's actually a trend that I see continuing. But things can go wrong and do go wrong. And I'll just give a few examples. We should be wary of that. Recently we saw in the UK that law enforcement deployed facial recognition at football fields in order to catch hooligans. That sounds like a good idea. The only thing is that this system was 98% inaccurate. Imagine how you would feel if you would go with your family to a football match and you would be pulled over by the police because the system was 98% wrong. We don't want that to happen. In the United States, we've heard that there has been a breach at the Office of Personnel Management, and over 5 million sets of fingerprints were stolen to hackers. Again, that's something that we really want to be wary of. And then there are more moral, I would say, philosophical issues. And recently with facial recognition. We know that in China, facial recognition technology is widely deployed in the public sphere for law enforcement. Do we want that as much here in Israel? We have to think about it. And we've recently heard that Chinese schools use facial recognition to monitor students' attention in class. No more daydreaming for students. That's too bad. And that's a first. We recently heard that Amazon started selling its facial recognition technology to law enforcement in the United States. And there was a public outcry in the media calling for Amazon not to sell its technology to law enforcement. That's the first time that I've heard of such a thing. And I think that's a trend that we'll continue seeing in the near future. And then I like the way the BBC framed this question. Can facial recognition fit with a fair society? Well, I would argue that it can, but it needs to be done in a balanced manner. Balancing what's important to us, such as privacy, cybersecurity to protect this information, and security in general, with all the good things that biometrics offer: usability, precision, efficiency. And our national policy for secure identification lays the golden route to a balanced biometric application. And we've also written a set of guidelines. These guidelines deal with 4 disciplines. First is management attention and management considerations. Second is biometric technology that should be looked at. Third is cybersecurity, and of course, privacy. And now once a company, a government, wishing to deploy a biometric application goes through these guidelines and makes sure everything is done according to them, then we would argue it's a balanced biometric application and it's fair to use it. So, what is our vision for a digital identity here in Israel? And by digital, I also mean biometric identity. It should be cross-device, starting first and foremost with our mobile phones. The Israeli government called it, surprisingly, mobile first, because we realize that mobile phones are Israelis' most used computing device. So we need to provide identity there first and foremost. Then, for more ad hoc uses, there should be some sort of tablet that can be moved around to perform stronger identification. Igal mentioned the election process. That kind of system could be used to strengthen voting identification at elections. Then there are kiosks, and our e-government unit at the Prime Minister's office has already started deploying these digital kiosks, and identification should be made available there too. And the good old PC and laptop, which of course we need to provide identification in. This should all be done under the framework of the National Policy for Secure Identification, abide by its guidelines and its rules. That assures us that it's done in a secure manner. We should really leverage our national EID. Our Ministry of the Interior really thoroughly enrolls each and every Israeli in order to get our EID. And the EID itself is a very strong credential. We really want to leverage that. That puts Israel in a great starting point to have very strong identities throughout digital space. We want the identities to be used throughout the entire market. Government, public sector, and if the private sector so wishes, private sector as well. We believe that in order for the economy to reap the maximum benefits of digital identity, it needs to be deployed throughout the entire market. We believe the sweet spot for identification is what I mentioned before, LOA 3. And that would really raise the bar for identification throughout the country and make our cyberspace more secure. We support and will continue supporting R&D in biometrics and identity. We believe the Israeli startup community and academia have a real potential of getting good ideas and marketing them. And last, but by no means least, and very important, digital identity is too big for just one government agency or just the government to do on its own. We need cooperation between government and the private sector in order for it to be a national identity. And we will do that. So, thank you very much. I hope that with more secure digital identities, we can make our cyberspace more robust and ensure that Israelis' identities are strong and reduce digital fraud. Thanks very much for coming. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.